Just hold the flowers, Mara. Try not to kill them like you kill everything else. My mother thrust a bouquet of white peonies into my arms and physically repositioned me behind the caterer's station, like I was a piece of furniture she hadn't decided where to place yet. My stepfather's retirement gala was in full swing. 200 guests in a rented ballroom, champagne towers, a live jazz quartet, and my stepsister, Vivian, standing at the center of it all, rehearsing the speech she was about to give. The speech where she would announce that our stepfather, Gerald, had officially named her CEO of Kessler & Rowe, the mid-tier commercial lending firm he had built over 30 years. She had been practicing that speech in the mirror for a week. I knew because she FaceTimed our mother while doing it, and my mother put it on speaker so I could hear how a real professional sounds. What none of them knew, not my mother, not Gerald, not Vivian, and certainly not the 200 guests clinking glasses and pretending to care about jazz, was that Kessler & Rowe had been technically insolvent for 11 months. And the woman who owned its largest outstanding debt obligation was currently arranging peonies behind the shrimp cocktail table. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 31 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have run a distressed asset recovery fund called Ashworth Capital. We specialize in acquiring non-performing commercial loans, the kind that banks quietly sell off their books when they realize the borrower is never going to pay. I have a team of 9 people, an office in Charlotte, and a net worth that would make Gerald choke on his scotch. But to this family, I am still the stepdaughter who showed up at 14 with a dead father's last name and no inheritance. The one who got C's in chemistry, the one who waitressed through community college while Vivian went to Georgetown on Gerald's dime. Little Miss Nobody, my mother called me once, not even with malice, just as a fact, like describing the weather. My mother married Gerald when I was 14. She had been a hairdresser, and Gerald was a client whose wife had recently died. He was kind to her at first. He was kind to me, too, in the way that people are kind to stray dogs. He fed me, housed me, let me sit at the dinner table. But he never looked at me the way he looked at Vivian. Vivian was his blood. Vivian was the heir. I was the surcharge. By the time I was 16, the household economy was clear. Vivian got piano lessons, SAT tutors, a brand new Audi for her 17th birthday. I got hand-me-downs and the suggestion that maybe I should look into vocational programs. When I told Gerald I wanted to study finance, he laughed. He actually laughed. Not cruelly, worse, dismissively. Finance is for people who understand numbers, Mara. You're more of a feelings person. My mother nodded. She always nodded. Agreeing with Gerald was her retirement plan. So I paid my own way. I worked nights at a 24-hour diner off Route 9, pouring coffee for truckers and studying for my Series 7 exam between orders. I slept 4 hours a night for 3 years. I graduated with a degree in finance and a minor in accounting from a school nobody had heard of, and I got a job at a boutique firm that specialized in buying bad debt. My boss saw something in me that my family never did. Patience. I was good at waiting. Within 5 years, I had built Ashworth Capital from a one-woman operation in a rented office above a dry cleaner into a legitimate fund with institutional investors and a track record that made banks return my calls. But I never told my family. Not out of spite. Not at first. I just realized early on that the moment I revealed success, they would find a way to diminish it. So I kept driving my 10-year-old Honda. I kept wearing the same 3 blazers, and every Thanksgiving, I sat at the far end of the table while Vivian talked about her meteoric rise at Kessler & Rowe, and my mother beamed, and Gerald raised his glass to his real daughter. 6 months ago, something interesting crossed my desk. A regional bank in Virginia was offloading a portfolio of non-performing commercial real estate loans. Most of them were garbage. Over-leveraged strip malls, failed condo conversions, the usual debris of bad decisions. But buried in the middle of the portfolio was a single loan that made my breath stop. Kessler & Rowe had taken out an $8 million commercial line of credit 3 years ago to expand into a new market. They had used the firm's office building, its client receivables, and Gerald's personal guarantee as collateral. The loan was 11 months past due. They had not made a single payment in almost a year. I pulled the financials. It was worse than I thought. Vivian had been running the firm for 2 years while Gerald transitioned into retirement, and in that time, she had burned through their cash reserves, chasing a commercial real estate development deal that collapsed when interest rates spiked. She had tried to cover the losses by taking on new clients with predatory fee structures, clients who quickly sued. 3 lawsuits were pending. The firm's malpractice insurance had lapsed because Vivian forgot to renew it. She forgot because she was in Tulum for 2 weeks posting Instagram stories about CEO mindset. I bought the entire loan portfolio. The bank was desperate to get it off their books, so I paid 62 cents on the dollar. That single transaction made me the senior secured creditor of Kessler and Rowe. I did not own the company, but I owned the chain around its neck. If they could not repay or restructure within the terms I set, I could force them into involuntary bankruptcy, seize the collateral, and strip the firm to its studs. Gerald's personal guarantee meant his house, the 5-bedroom colonial in McLean, where I spent my teenage years being made to feel like a guest, was also on the table. I sat with that knowledge for weeks. I ran projections, I read the lawsuits, I reviewed Vivian's spending, $11,000 on a team-building retreat at a resort in Aspen that was attended by Vivian and her boyfriend. I saw it all. And I made a decision. I would not warn them. I would not save them. I would show up at the gala, hold the flowers, and wait for the exact right moment to close the books. The ballroom was beautiful. Gerald had spared no expense for his own farewell, which was ironic, given that the firm paying for this party was hemorrhaging money, a champagne tower near the entrance. Personalized place cards with gold calligraphy. A 12-piece slideshow of Gerald's career playing on a loop behind the stage. Vivian was in a floor-length emerald gown, her hair pinned up, her smile camera-ready. She looked like a woman who had already won. My mother found me arranging napkins. I had not been assigned napkins. I was just doing it because standing still made me feel like a target. Mara, go check on the valet situation. 3 guests said they had to wait. She did not say please. She never said please to me. Please was a currency she reserved for Gerald and Vivian. I was hourly labor in her eyes. To be directed, not consulted. The valet is fine, Mom. Then find something useful to do. And change your posture. You look like you are apologizing for being alive. She straightened my collar with 2 fingers, the way you might adjust a crooked picture frame. Then she walked back to Gerald's table without another word. I checked my watch. My attorney, Daniel Chen, was arriving in 20 minutes. He was carrying a leather briefcase with 3 documents inside. The first was a formal demand letter for the outstanding $8 million loan. The second was a notice of default and acceleration, which meant the full balance was due immediately. The third was an offer of restructuring. My terms, take it or leave it. Daniel did not know I was related to the borrower. I had not told him because it did not matter. The law does not care about Thanksgiving seating arrangements. Vivian took the stage at 8:15. The crowd quieted. Gerald sat at the head table, his eyes wet with pride. My mother reached over and squeezed his hand. They looked like a postcard. Good evening, everyone, Vivian began, her voice steady and practiced. For 30 years, Gerald Kessler has been more than a businessman. He's been a mentor, a visionary, and the greatest father a daughter could ask for. She paused for effect. Today, I am honored to announce that as of this evening, I am officially the CEO of Kessler and Rowe, and I promise to carry his legacy forward with the same integrity, the same passion, and the same commitment to excellence that built this firm from the ground up. Applause. Standing ovation from the front tables. Gerald wiped his eyes. My mother whispered something in his ear that made him smile. I stood behind the caterer's station, holding a peony that had started to wilt. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the cold clarity of someone who has read the spreadsheet and knows what the applause does not. This company was dead. The woman on stage was eulogizing it and calling it a coronation. At 8:32, Daniel walked in. He was wearing a dark navy suit. He carried his briefcase close to his body, the way lawyers do when the contents are serious. He did not approach the head table. He found me first. Is this the right event? He asked quietly. Yes, table 1. The man with the gray hair is the personal guarantor. The woman in green is the current operator. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. You know these people. I do. Do you want to wait? No. She just announced herself as CEO. She accepted fiduciary responsibility in front of 200 witnesses. The timing is perfect. He nodded, straightened his tie, and walked toward the head table. I watched from the corner. This part I had choreographed carefully. Daniel would introduce himself. He would ask to speak privately. Gerald, being Gerald, would refuse to leave his own party. And then the conversation would happen in public, which was exactly what I needed. Not for humiliation, for documentation. 200 witnesses to the fact that they were served proper notice and given a fair opportunity to respond. Daniel reached the table. He extended his hand to Gerald. Mr. Kessler, my name is Daniel Chen. I represent Ashworth Capital, the current holder of your firm's senior secured credit facility. I apologize for the timing, but I have a matter that requires your immediate attention." Gerald frowned but shook his hand. He was a businessman. He knew what senior secured credit facility meant. "Can this wait? We are in the middle of an event." "I'm afraid it cannot, sir. The loan is 11 months past due. We've sent 4 notices to your registered agent. None were answered." Vivian stepped down from the stage, her smile fading. "What is this about?" Daniel set the demand letter on the table. "This is a formal demand for repayment of the outstanding balance of $8,217,000. The full amount is due under the acceleration clause. You have 30 days to remit payment or propose a restructuring plan. Failure to do so will result in foreclosure proceedings on all pledged collateral, including the commercial property at 440 Braddock Lane and the personal residence at 18 Sycamore Court." The table went silent. 2 guests nearby stopped mid-conversation. Gerald picked up the letter. His hands were shaking. "This is a mistake," Vivian said quickly. "Our lender is Piedmont Regional. We've been in communication with them about the—" "Piedmont sold the loan," Daniel said evenly. "Ashworth Capital purchased it 5 weeks ago. We are your creditor now." Gerald looked up from the letter. "Who the hell is Ashworth Capital?" This was the moment. I set down the peony. I walked from behind the caterer's station toward the table. My shoes clicked against the ballroom floor. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. I do not know why. Maybe they sensed the shift. Maybe someone signaled them. But the room was quiet except for my footsteps. I reached the table and stood next to Daniel. "I am." Gerald stared at me. He did not understand. "Ashworth Capital is my firm," I said. "I am the managing partner and sole owner. I purchased Kessler and Rowe's outstanding loan 5 weeks ago. I am your senior secured creditor." Vivian laughed. It was involuntary, a nervous bark. "Mara, this isn't funny. You work in— What do you even do? Data entry? Risk assessment. Then distressed debt acquisition. Then fund management. But you never asked." "This is absurd," my mother said from her seat. "Gerald, tell her to stop making a scene." Gerald was not listening to her. He was reading the letter. He was reading it the way a doctor reads a scan when the news is bad. Slowly, with his lips moving slightly, as if willing the words to rearrange themselves into something survivable. "The firm owes $8 million, Gerald said quietly. "And you bought the note." "Yes. You bought the note on my company, your family's company." "It was never my family's company, Gerald. You made that clear when I was 16. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Daniel continued, professional as always. "Mr. Kessler, I want to emphasize that my client is offering a restructuring path. This does not have to end in foreclosure. But we need to discuss terms, and we need to do it within the 30-day window." Vivian grabbed the letter from Gerald's hands. She scanned it, her eyes moving fast. "This can't be right. The firm is solvent. We just closed the Mercer deal last quarter." "The Mercer deal generated $400,000 in fees," I said. "You spent $380,000 of it on the Aspen retreat and a new office renovation. The remaining $20,000 covered exactly 1 month of payroll. Your malpractice insurance lapsed in March. You have 3 pending lawsuits with a combined exposure of $2.6 million. Your operating account has $19,000 in it. I know because I pulled the UCC filings and ran the forensics myself." Vivian's face went white. Not red, white. The color of someone who has just realized that the person they dismissed as irrelevant has read every receipt. "You went through our books?" she whispered. "I am your creditor. It is my legal right and fiduciary obligation to assess the collateral backing my investment. You would know that if you had attended a single one of the compliance seminars your firm is required to hold annually." My mother stood up. "Mara, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you will not humiliate this family in public." I looked at her. I had rehearsed what I would say to her for years. I had imagined speeches, monologues, devastating one-liners that would crack her open and make her see me. But standing there, looking at her face twisted with the particular anger she reserved for me, the anger of a woman who could not believe the furniture was talking back, I realized I did not need a speech. I just needed the truth. "I'm not humiliating anyone, Mom. I'm doing business. The same thing Gerald taught Vivian to do. The only difference is that I'm better at it." She sat down. She sat down the way a balloon deflates, slowly and without resistance, as if the air inside her had been replaced with something heavier. Gerald folded the letter and placed it on the table. He was calmer now. The initial shock had passed, and the businessman in him was taking over. "What do you want, Mara?" "I want to save the firm. I don't want anyone to lose their house. I don't want Vivian in legal trouble. I want a clean resolution." "Then why do this here? Why tonight?" Because I sent 4 certified letters to your registered agent over the past 5 weeks. Vivian threw them away. I know, because I had the mail tracked. She signed for 2 of them personally and never opened them. She shredded one in front of her assistant. I am here because you left me no other choice. Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew I was right. The confirmation was in her eyes, the quick flicker of guilt before her pride covered it over. Daniel placed the restructuring offer on the table. This is the proposed term sheet. Ashworth Capital is willing to extend the loan for 24 months at a reduced interest rate, contingent on 3 conditions. First, an independent audit of Kessler & Rose financials within 14 days. Second, appointment of a chief financial officer approved by Ashworth to oversee cash management. Third, Vivian Kessler steps down as CEO. Absolutely not, Vivian snapped. He just named me CEO tonight. And in the 23 months before tonight, I said, you spent the firm into insolvency, let the malpractice insurance lapse, exposed every client to litigation risk, and used company funds to take your boyfriend skiing. You did not earn this title, Vivian. You inherited it. And you wrecked it. Gerald put his hand on Vivian's arm. Let me read the terms. Dad, she is trying to steal the firm. I am trying to keep the firm alive, I said. If I wanted to steal it, I would file the foreclosure tomorrow. I would take the building, I would take the receivables, and I would take the house. I am offering you a path where none of that happens. But the path requires accountability. That is the one thing this family has never been willing to give. The table was quiet. Guests at nearby tables were pretending not to listen, the way people do when they are absolutely listening. The slideshow behind the stage was still cycling through photos of Gerald shaking hands with mayors and cutting ribbons. It felt like a eulogy. Gerald read the term sheet. He read it carefully, line by line, the way he should have been reading Vivian's expense reports for the last 2 years. When he finished, he set it down and removed his reading glasses. You built this fund yourself, he said. It was not a question. Yes. No investors from my network. No introductions. No help. You never offered any? He nodded slowly. There was something in his eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. Not pride. Not yet. But recognition. The acknowledgement that he had miscalculated, that the asset he had written off at 0 had quietly compounded in value while the one he bet everything on had depreciated to nothing. I will sign the restructuring, he said. Dad, no. Vivian grabbed his arm. She is bluffing. She won't foreclose. She doesn't have the nerve. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I opened the foreclosure filing. It was already prepared, already signed by my attorney, already uploaded to the court's electronic filing system. All it needed was one tap. This is the involuntary bankruptcy petition, I said, holding the screen toward Vivian. It's ready to file. One tap and it hits the docket at 9 a.m. Monday. The automatic stay will freeze every account. The building goes to auction. Gerald's house goes to auction. The pending lawsuits become claims against the estate. And you, Vivian, as the operating officer who let the insurance lapse, become personally liable. Not the firm. You. Vivian stared at the screen. I watched her process it. I watched the moment her confidence cracked. Not dramatically, not with a scream or a sob, but with a small, involuntary exhale. The sound of someone who has just realized they are standing on ice and it is already breaking. You wouldn't, she whispered. I bought the debt, hired the lawyers, prepared the filings, flew Daniel here tonight, and walked across this ballroom in front of 200 people. At what point did I give you the impression I was bluffing? Gerald picked up the pen that Daniel had placed on the table. He signed the restructuring agreement. 3 pages, initials on every clause. When he finished, Daniel notarized the signature and slid the executed copy into his briefcase. I turned to Vivian. You'll receive the formal audit notice on Monday. Cooperate fully and this stays civil. Obstruct anything, shred anything, move anything, and I filed a petition that afternoon. Vivian did not respond. She was staring at the table, at the place where the demand letter had been, as if she could still see the numbers burning into the white tablecloth. My mother had not spoken in several minutes. She was sitting very still, her champagne glass untouched, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I could not categorize. It was not anger anymore. It was not shock. It was the look of someone who has just discovered that the wall they have been leaning against for 20 years was actually a door, and it just opened. Mara, she said softly, how long have you? 6 years, Mom. I've been doing this for 6 years. You never asked. I didn't think. I know. You didn't think. That's the problem. I picked up my bag. I nodded to Daniel. He excused himself and headed for the exit. I straightened my blazer, the same one I had worn to every family event for the past 3 years. The one my mother once said made me look like a substitute teacher. Before I left, I stopped at the caterer's station. The peonies were still there, wilting slightly in their glass vase. I pulled one out, tucked it into my lapel, and turned to my mother. By the way, Mom, you told me to hold the flowers because that's all I was good for. Turns out I'm also pretty good at holding the deed to your house. But don't worry, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to let you keep living there, because unlike this family, I don't punish people for existing. I just expect them to stop pretending I don't. I walked out through the ballroom. The jazz quartet had started playing again, something slow and mournful. Guests watched me pass, but nobody stopped me. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but they could feel the shift, the way you feel the barometric pressure drop before a storm. Outside, the air was cool. Daniel was waiting by his car. That went about as well as it could have, he said. Better. Nobody cried. Your stepsister might later. She might. But she'll survive. They all will. They just won't be able to pretend I don't exist anymore. He shook my hand and drove away. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking up at the ballroom windows. I could see silhouettes moving inside, people returning to their tables, the slideshow still cycling, the champagne still flowing. The party would continue. Gerald would smile through it because that is what men like Gerald do. Vivian would excuse herself early with a headache. My mother would stay until the end, keeping up appearances, because appearances were the only currency she had ever understood. And me, I would go home to my apartment in Charlotte. I would pour myself a glass of wine. I would sit on my balcony and watch the city lights. And I would feel, for the first time in 17 years, like a person who takes up the right amount of space. The audit went through 2 weeks later. The results were worse than I projected. Vivian had been commingling personal expenses with firm accounts for 18 months. Spa treatments, designer handbags, a vacation to Mykonos listed as a client development trip. The forensic accountant flagged 11 transactions that bordered on embezzlement, but I did not press it. I could have. The evidence was airtight. But I had learned something from watching my family operate for 17 years. Power is not about destroying people. It is about making them understand that you can, and choosing not to. Gerald hired a new CFO, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Owens who had turned around 2 failing firms in the last decade. Under her oversight and my restructuring terms, Kessler and Rowe stabilized within 6 months. They settled 2 of the 3 lawsuits. They reinstated their insurance. They even turned a small profit in the 3rd quarter. Vivian took a job at a mid-level consulting firm in Reston. She never called me. She never apologized. But she also never threw away another piece of certified mail. Gerald called me once, about 4 months after the gala. He did not say much. He told me the azaleas in the backyard were blooming. He told me Patricia was doing a good job. And then, just before he hung up, he said something he had never said in the 17 years I had known him. I should have looked more carefully, Mara, at the numbers, and at you. It was not an apology. It was barely an acknowledgement. But from a man who had spent 3 decades betting on the wrong child and calling it strategy, it was the closest thing to accountability I was ever going to get. I told him the azaleas sounded beautiful, and then I hung up and went back to work. My mother sent me a card for my birthday that year. Inside, in her careful handwriting, she had written just 5 words. I see you now, Mara. I put it on my refrigerator, not because it fixed anything, but because it proved something I had always suspected. The people who dismiss you the loudest are usually the ones who were never really looking. And when they finally do look, what they see is not a failure or a liability or a girl holding flowers behind a catering table. What they see is the woman who bought the building they were standing in and never once raised her voice.